Cool. We're very excited about the conversation here today. For those of you who are not familiar, we here at Domestique do a monthly masterclass series. The topics are always kind of based upon what we're hearing from clients, prospects, so like, hey, would love more information on this. What we try and do as a part of the monthly masterclass series is we try and find a bunch of like super smart people to come have a conversation with. Very excited to talk with Jeff. For those of you who don't know Jeff, he's one of the most talented RevOps people I know. Jeff and I have known each other for, it's probably going on 3 or 4 years, so on and so forth. But Jeff, give us the TLDR background about yourself and RevOps, and then give us kind of one quick fun fact about yourself.
Hey, Reese, Alex, thanks for having me. I appreciate you inviting me to be a speaker to one of your sessions. Name's Jeff. Thanks everyone for having me on. I lead a solo fractional agency called RevOps Impact. It also has a content business. So if you've listened to the RevOps Review podcast on Spotify or Apple, that's in partnership with Cognizant. And I run a Substack called the Rev Engine or RevOps Impact Substack, talking about all things revenue operations every week, twice a week. One fun fact about me, let's see. Oh, I was in an improv group back in undergrad, and one of my directors, her name was Ali Wong, and she said I was very terrible at improv. She happened to be very good at comedy.
As in the Ali Wong.
Supposedly, yes.
Yes, that's awesome. We always do this. We do fun facts with all our clients, and like some of the fun facts here, just like the amount of times like people on the call who are actually like, they're like, I didn't know you did that. So anyways, we love to do that. So excited to chat today. For those of you who are not familiar with Domestique, we're a fractional RevOps consulting shop. Alex and I are the 2 founders here. Alex and I have been working together for a decade. He kind of built his career in ops. I built my career in sales ops. So we have what we call healthy tension. We got a team of 50, full stack RevOps team, but that is us. So we're going to talk capacity planning today. So there are a couple of like major RevOps initiatives that like are very seasonal and like on the calendar, and we get a bunch of stuff that happens kind of throughout the year, right? So like capacity planning, we've been talking a lot with a lot of our clients here over the last couple of months. We're going to talk about do's, don'ts, best practices, how to make sure you're kind of avoiding all this type of stuff. If you have any questions, the way we always like to host these sessions, like come off mute. Much rather have a conversation. I promise you, you don't want to listen to me drown on the whole time. That's why we brought Jeff in here. Come off mute. Much rather you ask questions. If you can't get your questions in today, we'll obviously send you a follow-up with the recording from this, but feel free to kind of reach out with us, and we're always happy to kind of jump on and have a brainstorming session or whatever it is. So with that, we're going to jump into things. I'm not going to go through all this type of, I'm not going to go through this. You'll see this. We got a couple of major chapters. We're going to talk about kind of the areas where people kind of, the classic mistakes that we see the most in capacity planning. Before we jump in, we always call this capacity planning, but I generally think this is probably not the right term. If you think about this, is really more of an all go-to-market annual plan, of which capacity for the different teams is one of the kind of outputs of it. The traditional term we hear a lot is capacity planning, but like for all intents and purposes for the conversation today, this is like your go-to-market operating plan for the year. All right, before we jump into this, we always like to baseline ourselves and kind of like, what is RevOps? And the reason being is this kind of like sets up this conversation here today. So like the 10-second elevator pitch when we talk about is like the connective tissue across your go-to-market. But we here at Domestique, when we think about it, it's this, as we talk about the entire go-to-market, so product marketing, BDR, sales, PSCS support, and 5 work streams, the order being important, so strategy, process, tools, data enablement. A lot of this like go-to-market operating plan falls in this strategy bucket, and then we'll talk about like how do you operationalize it. Jeff, you spent a lot of time kind of in the RevOps space. You and I were talking about this yesterday as we were kind of like leading into this. Walk us through your kind of definition of this, and like I know our definitions are very similar, but love to kind of like hear your take on it. You're on mute, sir.
Can't find it fast enough. So I typically define revenue operations as the intersection of strategy and execution. across 4 key pillars. That's process enablement, advisory, and systems. Now that's on the go-to-market side, on the revenue side. But there's also the whole go-to-market side, which is the whole product to go-to-market interface. So how do we plan and work ahead with product to make sure that we're landing the go-to-market plans to launch exactly when the product is going to launch as well?
Cool. And you're going to see kind of this intersection of kind of everything that kind of Jeff's talking about, this intersection of kind of like product, the different go-to-market teams, and we get into kind of this capacity planning, best practices. So we always like to start with like, where do we see the classic issues when we're ever doing capacity planning? These are some of the most common mistakes that we see. It's not a comprehensive list. Jeff, what are your favorite ones? Like pick 2 or 3 and like, what's your favorite ones of like the most classic mistakes here?
So number 1 is starting way too late. Some folks, they're so wrapped up in closing Q3, Q4 that, oh my gosh, the next fiscal year is about to start and they don't even have a plan for the following year. And it can be problematic, especially if you have very long sales cycles, right? So if you don't start early, it could be very problematic. The second thing is not working together, right? You have a go-to-market model with different tabs, and each person is plugging away in actually a different worksheet, a different workbook, when instead you should have an integrated model that has the opinions from all across leadership. And then lastly, no bottoms-up check on a top-down plan, right? The plan is next year. Your board or your investors tell you need a 2x, no matter what. That's the magical what I call spreadsheet magic, where a CFO magically changes your win rates from 20% to 40%, and you look at it and say, how am I going to get there?
And I know personally we have a couple of CFOs on here, so we're going to talk a little shit about them, but not a lot of shit about them. So, anyways,
I apologize, but not really.
No. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to pick a number of these issues, and we're going to walk through specifically why it's a mistake and what you can do about it as you're thinking about kind of best practices now. So we talked something about this timeline process. Before we get into the timeline, we think there's a handful of building blocks when it comes to kind of capacity planning that's important to make sure you have. Now, some of these you may already have, so you may not need to worry about them. But the building blocks, as we think about them, are kind of stage definition alignment. I know this sounds like very basic. You would be shocked how many organizations don't have this line. And the reason why it's so important is like, if Jeff and I are working on a capacity plan model together, and I come into a meeting and I think, hey, Jeff, we need like 20 MQLs, and he comes in and says, hey, we need 1,000. And the issue is we have 2 different definitions on kind of what is an MQL. It's the whole Spider-Man meme of just like, where they're sitting there like that. Jeff already talked about bottoms up, the bottoms up model. Then we've got the top down model. We have something that we affectionately refer to as the oh shit meeting. We're going to talk more about that here. And then finalizing targets and assumptions. And then one of the most important things you can do is having a process in place to track these targets moving into the following year. And we'll talk about kind of all this, but this is like the general process in general as you're kind of thinking about through this. Oftentimes people think it's just this like an Excel model, and it's not this larger process. So we always like to take a step back of like, when we're talking capacity planning, it's not just building a model, it's actually this entire process and what are all the different steps in it. So Jeff, I know we were talking about this yesterday. When we talk about like timing, when is the right time to start your capacity planning process?
So by the way, I was working with a client yesterday, Reese, and literally had an oh shit moment with them. I walked them through the capacity plan. Yeah. Oh yeah. Right after you and I had chatted, I was like, you know what? This is about to be one of those meetings. Well, okay. So my experience, I've worked at companies like AWS and at Google. So AWS, for example, starts their planning process in April. They have this very meta planning session from April, May, and June, which focuses on how do we conduct our planning process this year? How do we get different segments, regions, across multiple product lines, across multiple channels to work together? That factorial of all those different components to work together. So they're constructing the PMO, the project timeline, from April through June. And then they formally kick off many of the steps starting in earnest around July. At Google, we started our planning at August. And mind you, I was at GCP or Google Cloud when they were only $1 billion in run rate. So much smaller business than they are today, but still a sophisticated planning motion nonetheless. But you want to start as early as possible. And the reason you do that is because there are many conversations that are outside of go-to-market's control. So for example, which segments are you going to target? Which products are you likely to release? Will that open up new parts of your SAM, your addressable market? If so, does that belie a different change in your go-to-market motion? Do you have different people that you need tomorrow compared to what you have today? Do you need to build the enablement and the product marketing machine ahead of time? So you want to buffer as much time as possible and break down your plan into multiple components. This right here is a very nice high-level overview. You can break each one of these down into discrete components, territories, account assignments, comp plans, quotas, role design. But you want to start early. That's my #1 advice.
And to that point here, I want to acknowledge 2 things. One, we're having today's conversation November 20th, which, just a heads up, is too late. And if you haven't finished your capacity plan, it's fine. Got to get it done as quickly as possible. For those who are thinking about next year already, exactly the comment that Jeff was just making. We normally see capacity planning as a dynamic process based upon kind of like your sales cycle. So if you have a 3-month sales cycle, you want it finished no later than into September, because all the pipeline you create October, November, December is actually Q1 pipeline. And the problem is like, if you finish it November 20th, your Q1's kind of baked. Now, the question we always get when we talk about this like dynamic thing is like, what if we have 6 months or 9 months or 12 months? Well, we then acknowledge, and to Jeff's point, start as early as possible. And you want to be thinking about like, all right, your Q1, your 1/2 may already be baked. What are the activities you can run that may have shorter sales cycles, more expansion plays, or they're kind of smaller, kind of like, you know, SMB, mid-market, things like that, if you do have a gap in that kind of pipeline thing. So start early, start early, start early. If you're not finished with your FY26 capacity planning, try and get this dialed as quickly as possible. All right, team, I want to acknowledge we're 15 minutes in. I haven't gotten a single question here. I'm perfectly comfortable calling on people. So like, we like to make these interactive, all this type of stuff. So anyways, Jeff, walk us through your favorite do's and don'ts. Like, what's the #1 or 2 takeaways you would, you know, highlight here on like the timeline in particular?
Yeah, excellent. By the way, I used to work at Intel as well. They did a short range plan and a long range plan. So they would have a continuous planning motion as well, baked underneath the long range plan, which is a 3-year or a 5-year vision. So kudos to any org that's able to pull that off. For do's and don'ts, make planning a collaborative exercise. Do not attempt to do this in a silo, right? Every department are partners with one another. You want to align your North Star and row in the right direction. It's just kind of an analogy. And the planning motion is meant to be that major process across the org. Next is your top down and your bottoms up motion. Top down is really looking at things from starting from revenue and applying growth numbers to it, you know, at its very bare essence. A bottoms up is looking at the troops on the field, what type of resources you can deploy on marketing and how much pipeline could they generate and therefore close. Those 2 numbers aren't always aligned the very first model, and it belies strategy, scenario planning. So you want to keep turning the wheel around these 2 models until they get really close, until there's consensus around what the business strategy is going to be. And you want to be honest with, you know, what type of motion you have. So for example, you know, not all deals are going to close very quickly. They close long. You have different motions. And so you want to be able to have that conversation very thoughtfully. And then if you have a gap to goal that is reasonable to close, start thinking about gap closing measures, as Reese has mentioned. And then, you know, this is, you know, probably goes beyond many folks' payrolls. But you want to be able to prep the executive team to be able to have a frank conversation with the board. The board, you know, are business operators themselves, right? So the fact that you're able to come to the table with different scenarios and options, those are things that you want to prepare, especially as a RevOps org. You want to arm your team with as much information as possible. Don'ts are
one note to Jeff's point right there, where we see a ton of mistakes on the point that Jeff is just making there, and we're going to get a little bit more into this. Oftentimes, the challenges companies have with capacity plan is they, one, either agree to a number that the board has set before they've done kind of the bottoms up to see if it's doable, and or two, are unwilling to have a difficult conversation. And I promise you, the difficult conversation now versus the difficult conversation in 7 months, it's much easier to have the difficult conversation today than it is 7 months from now. So I know it sucks, resetting expectations and all that type of stuff. This is that kind of alignment. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt, man.
No. I was just gonna say, around April is when around April you're gonna have a sense, spidey senses start going off. Oh shit, we're gonna have to do a June or a July replan, right? We're gonna have to do a replan, and a replan could have implications on the people as well, right? So there's domino effects to not getting this right, or not getting this well that time around. Don'ts, don't go it alone with just a spreadsheet. You have to be able to communicate top-down expectations early so that the bottoms-up model can ferment and grow, and go back and forth. There's a question, Steve.
We got two questions. So Heather's got a great question in there, and then Steve's got his hand up. So Heather's question is, what advice would you have for somebody that's leading an annual planning process that's new to the company, where we've not historically run a planning process based on metrics? What are your thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, I've been in this role many times. What I've done is I've come with a project plan on what a planning process could look like, and you have to start going on a roadshow internally and selling the benefits of a planning process. You have to have allies. You can't do it alone, shouting into the wind. You have to bring others with you.
Yeah, I love it. Steve, you got a question, sir?
Yeah, sometimes I've struggled with the audience questioning the data. So, where do you draw the line with how much info you provide to build trust versus, hey, here's the summarized consent recommendation. What are we going to do about it?
Love that question. So, one of the reasons why we always like starting with the stage definition alignment is if you start with this, and Jeff and I sit there in a room together and we haggle out what is an MQL, and we finally get to, hey, this is an MQL. All right, moving forward, we're stacking hands. This is what an MQL is. Then you don't get any of this like, well, hang on a second, I have this report that has this filter on it, so on and so on. That greatly helps. Jeff, what would you add to that? What else would you add?
I think it's about one, defining, what's the game you're playing on the field, and that starts with you talk about I talk about the life cycle model. Other folks use the bow tie. The bow tie is really instructive because it's a great visual, and what the visual shows you are 3 elements that you could optimize for: volume going into each stage, the conversion rate, which is also a byproduct of the input for the volume of the next stage, and then the time that you spend within each stage. And then there's another element, which is how large of a win do you get at the end, which is typically measured in some sort of dollar metric. And so as long as we're very clear on what the definitions are across the way, and that's a process question, right? So you have poor process, you're going to have bad data, in my opinion. So as long as you nail the process that you're trying to aim for, the measurements from which you're trying to optimize, you have clear definitions, both not just on a business definition, but you also have a technical definition, so that when folks pull their reports, you have high fidelity across the data that you're looking at.
And to Jeff's point here, Steve, we do a lot of engagements that are like, I don't trust the data engagements, and 99% of them are always process stuff. So like the irony is like the next section we're going to go into is like getting your definitions right. 2 best things you can do if you haven't done them already: life cycle stages, stage advancement criteria. This is an example of life cycle stages, and to Jeff's point, this is like the customer journey. What's the definition of it? What are key activities? And then you have a technical definition of how it is actually mapped into your systems. And then stage advancement criteria is the exact same thing, but just in the opportunity funnel. And normally inside of stage advancement criteria, you'll tie it to like a revenue methodology, like a band, spice, MEDPIC. But you get those two right, and then to Jeff's point, go on that road show to essentially say, hey, you know, we defined MQL as this. You just brought in a different port that has this other filter. Like, we all said this. Don't you remember that conversation? Where, like, that helps stop with the, the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah,
so
I love these visuals. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and by the way, anybody has any questions, we're sending out this deck afterwards. So there's lots of examples here of like, this is what is life cycle stages. This is what is stage advancement criteria. I know some people are very familiar with these things, but like, if you don't have either of those two things in your organization, strongly recommend do it tomorrow. It's an easy process to go implement, and I promise you it'll have major impacts on how you're converting things through the funnel, as well as your close one ASPs over time. Cool. I'm going to keep us moving. Love the questions. Keep the questions firing away. Jeff, it looked like you got to Trent's question. Trent, great to see you, sir. Jeff, anything else? We're kind of just talking about definitions. Anything else you'd add into the definition things, or should we kind of move on?
Yeah, I would just say I've learned this from a peer of mine, Molly Bodensteiner. She always talks about you have bad data because you have bad process, right? And as long as if everyone has a different definition of what your process is as a business, that's problematic. So it's one of the best tools you can have for alignment.
We talk about this as this is the Rosetta Stone, or you're hooked on phonics for your organization, right? You're trying to just get everybody speaking the same language. So we got a former customer here, Brian. He's on the phone. We did a capacity planning process with him and his team a year ago, 2 years ago. But we went through this, and we had several meetings where everybody was kind of like, "Wait, hang on a second. What is a MQL? What's the stage one?" And so like, Brian got to be with us in that. So.
Yeah, it was good. And I think, there were elements where we had a lot of this stuff documented, and then, I think you're right, Reese, that it was more like pre-opportunity stuff where we had to iron out a little bit more of the definitions, and then now we're in a really good position with all that stuff.
Love it. All right, we're going to talk. So we talked kind of like timeline, definitions. Now we're going to talk marrying the top down and bottoms up. And Jeff alluded to this earlier, right? Top down, this is kind of what the board and the executive wants you to grow at. Bottoms up, this is what you've historically done. This is the people on the, I love how the Jeff's analogy that, the people on the field, all that type of stuff. One just huge note before we even get into this. Do not let your CEO agree to any board top down number until you've done the bottoms up analysis. I have seen in countless board meetings where like it's usually the Q3 or the Q4 board meetings, usually Q3-ish. Some board members on his or her email, not paying attention to whatever's going on, and all of a sudden the question comes up, hey, what do you want to grow at next year? They look up and go like this, 50%, and everybody just shakes their heads yes, and like no one has actually done the bottoms up. So like start there, and I promise you it'll help with some of the kind of difficult conversations. So all right, bottoms up. This is doing the historical, and it's not just a sales bottoms up, but the historical, what have we done? Jeff, walk us through the process when you've done these bottoms up models. What do we need to make sure that you're doing? What do you need to be aware of? Best practices, all that good stuff.
I'll just use an analogy, right? Like you look at basketball, you put 5 players in the field, there's only 48 minutes. There's like constraints, right? So, and how many seconds per possession, how many shots could you take? Yes, defense probably could yield you more possessions, but there's a theoretical maximum. Same thing when it comes to capacity plans. Folks are hired, they join the company, their heads on a swivel for the first 30, 60, 90 days. They're not as productive as a full-time employee. So you might have to come up with a metric that's a full-time equivalent. And so they take time to ramp. How long does it take for them to quickly learn the industry, the product, give them the accounts and the leads that they should assign? And then how can they get better at their at-bats every moment, every week by week? And so in your capacity plan, one of the things that I look for is when a role comes in, and you might have different positions across your org. You might have an account executive versus an SDR. They might be in the different segments. They might be in a different region. And you might have different ramp curves, productivity curves for each one of these roles. And so when they come into the org, you're layering them as goose eggs on day one. And then they start to become more productive as they go over time. And so that's what you're seeing the green highlight there. And you're seeing it stagger that looks like a 1, then a 2, right? And then there might be a 3. So depending on your ramp curve, and I just went through this yesterday with that oh shit meeting I had, which is you're not productive in the first 3 months, right? Because I interviewed the reps who are in seat, and all of them universally said it took me more than 6 months to feel very comfortable with speaking about the company and our value, right? So that's something that has to improve on paper and in reality. So in your bottoms up model, consider ramp. Second, not everyone stays. So what is the average tenure? If you look at sales rep movements, people leave, people graduate out, people take more money, other jobs for a variety of reasons. Some people say sales isn't for them. So you want to be able to think through, okay, I don't know exactly when or who will leave, but I need to be able to build in churn metrics. Now, when you have attrition with folks who are regrettable attritions, right? Like those are your top performers. Those are major losses of productivity, right? In your org. It's hard to predict that. So when you're building these plans, think about ramp, think about churn. And then you want to be able to look at not just the sales productivity, because you might have outbound, inbound motions, partner motions. If you're predominantly inbound and you're not surging marketing at the top of funnel, you're adding folks headcount down at the bottom, all you're doing is dividing the inbound by the increased number of heads. So there's fewer, folks are eating less on their plate. So they have to make up the gap, or you have to incrementally add at the front of the funnel.
By the way, I want to stop there. What Jeff just said is one of the most important mistakes. Thank you, Trent. Yes, heart, all the emojis, all of the emojis. So I have seen, Alex and I were literally on a call yesterday watching this mistake happen in real time. I asked a question and they're essentially saying, hey, we're going to double our sales team. I'm like, well, when are they going to start hiring people? Oh, they're going to start hiring in January. I'm like, okay, cool. So has marketing got the budget, in advance of that? And are they going to have the pipeline in place so that when people show up, they're ready to go? And they're like, no. Like that, you have to think about this in an all go-to-market motion. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to kind of double click on that.
Oh, here's another thing. You need to hire 30 roles, but you have 1 recruiter.
Yeah. Yes, but these are all the assumptions. As you're thinking through these assumptions, one of the things, and Jeff, curious to get your opinion on this, one of the things we've always recommended is you look back at the historical stuff about like, hey, what's been our, average, quota attainment? What was our, stage 1 to close 1 conversion? We normally recommend taking a trailing 12-month approach to it unless there was a material change in business strategy. Said another way, all of a sudden we enter, 6 months ago, we entered the enterprise space, and because of which, our enterprise kind of conversion rates, like we don't really have good data on that, but we still have decent data on the mid-market side. Like, so taking it back to where there was kind of like a material. Jeff, what are your thoughts on kind of like pulling historical data for the assumptions?
If you have operating history, right, your entity has been a going concern for a number of years, then it tells me that you have some data to bank on. I'm working with a client now that has changed their sales stages 5 out of the last 5 years. So to, think about, does this stage equate to the similar stage from the past? It's very difficult. So I just baseline it to, was that a qualified op or not? And then how long did it take from, qualified date to win? Then you can baseline at least at the bare bones.
And the point that Jeff is making here is like, don't let great get in the way of good enough. Like you're trying to get this directional. The model is inherently going to be wrong at the end of it. You need it directional and you're going to update it over time. All right.
Now, in the absence of data, oh, go ahead.
No. Finish your thought.
Yeah, in the absence of data, you're benchmarking, right? Like you're thinking through, well, an org of selling to this in this go-to-market motion, and then you have to start thinking about your right to win, right? A little bit in product marketing and a little bit of sales enablement and product, which is like, do we have a differentiated offering? If we don't have a differentiated offering, are we winning in other aspects? Customer service, support, quick implementation. But you want to think about what's your right to win if you don't have a lot of operating history, and you're unfortunately going to have to operate on a lot of heuristics.
And 1000% agree of like, you can still build a capacity plan without data, and you need to think about it at kind of a more macro level, thinking about like where you sit in the market, what's your product like, all that type of stuff. All right, I'm going to keep us moving forward because we got a lot of stuff to cover through. So the O ship meeting, we've referred to this. We think they're generally in the capacity planning process, 2 O ship meetings. The first one happens around this time of year. And what happens is the board member who is typing away and just, put their finger in there and says, I want you to grow by 50%. We do the historical bottoms up analysis, looking at all these different assumptions, and essentially says we can grow by 20%. I have sat in this meeting 1,000 times, 99 out of 100 times. That's first marrying the top down, bottoms up. There is a big ass gap. So what the O ship meeting is getting the CEO, CFO, all the key go-to-market leaders in a room together to show the delta. And this isn't, hey, chicken little, the sky's falling, but it's now starting to kind of work through, all right, what can we do to start to close the gap? So that's first O ship meeting. The second O ship meeting is if you don't go through this process, you don't track it on a regular basis, it usually happens 6 or 7 months from now when you realize you're going to miss the number. We're going to talk more about that here later on, but we're going to focus on the first O ship meeting, right? A couple of important things here. And then Jeff, I know you sat in this, I know you sat in this one yesterday. Of it's really easy just to kind of change assumptions in Excel to make the numbers work. If you are going to change an assumption, please, everybody hear me. You need to tie it to some sort of enablement or key initiative. Said another way, if you're going to say, hey, our close rate is going to increase 5%. Why is your close rate going to increase 5%? Oh, okay, we do a terrible job at stage 3 and stage 4 conversion. We think it's tied to the paper process. We're going to run an enablement session about navigating the paper process and do a certificate. You need to have this can't just be a fun with an Excel standpoint. Jeff, I know you sent one of these yesterday. What was it like? How do you navigate this, and how do you get to a place where you can start to marry the top down and bottoms up?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to do is making sure that you have an analogy. So in finance, there's a 3-statement model, right? So the 3-statement model is all the income statement, the balance sheet, cash flow statement, they're all tied together, right? Any investment banking interview, they'll drill you on this. Go-to-market model, same thing. You have your inputs, your process, and then the outputs, right? Obviously, we want to work backwards from the outputs, but your inputs are going to be, what's your demand gen budget? How many eyeballs, how many leads, how many MQLs are going to come from that? Then there's the outbound or the inbound or hybrid different roles for sales. So you're going to have all of these spreadsheets, tabs connected to one another so that when you change a number from here, it's going to have an impact here. That enables you to have scenario plans. And so when you have this top-down, bottoms-up gap, you can close the gap. Now, some of the numbers can be fantastical. That's going to definitely show you that your gap is way too large. Right, jumping from 20% to 80% win rate. Okay, well, that metric in isolation probably doesn't make sense. Let's take a look at what's a reasonable improvement for one metric, and then what's a reasonable improvement for another metric. And then if you were so inclined to do something crazy, you could build a Monte Carlo simulation, but that would be crazy. But you're just thinking through all the scenarios. What's realistic? What can the org change and how much they can stomach? Right? You're trying to put too much change in an org is going to put incredible stress on the organization. You're just going to fail. And so you start to look at, okay, well, order of priority, what has the highest leverage to change? Is it that we need a standardized qualification methodology and remove the idiosyncrasy from our SDR organization? Okay, well, that's a pretty high leverage opportunity that you can scale. Is it that we have a standard mutual action planning motion in the middle of our sales motion? That's going to hopefully have an uplift of 10% from stage 3 to 4. Okay, that could be a bottleneck that you unlock. So really thinking through where are your bottlenecks. That's why the life cycle is so important to measure, and then look at what are the conversion rates and where you can pinpoint some improvements.
Love all of that. Love all of this. Is one of the most important things you will do in the capacity planning process, because this is outlining all the assumptions, and it's important, to Jeff's point, document them and then hold yourselves accountable to these as you continue to revisit the capacity plan. All right, love where this is going. So one of the questions we're getting a lot of, Steve, you got a great question.
Do you guys have a template, like a model template you're willing to share?
We do have a template. Reach out to us. Happy to kind of share it. It's kind of an all bottoms up one. So we got one.
Thanks.
So one of the questions we're getting a lot of is like, hey, AI, this is this fancy buzzword. How is this changing capacity planning? What does this look like? I heard the most ridiculous thing. I won't name the venture or the private equity firm. You all know this private equity firm, but I was talking with one of their portcos the other day. Apparently, they're pushing all their portcos to move from the rule of 40 to the rule of 60 because they think AI is having a 50% increase on their ability to grow. Yeah, I'm seeing some eyebrows raised, and I was just like laughing hysterically. So, anyways, we have a whole nother session about like AI and all this stuff. There is definitely productivity gains. So, how do you bake in those productivity gains into your capacity planning? Jeff, I know you're doing this right now. Walk us through your kind of thoughts on this.
Okay, so this year I've been implementing a lot of AI workflows and embedding AI at different parts of the customer journey. One thing I'll caveat, AI is improving very fast. There is a sort of Moore's law with the type of task that AI can accomplish, right? So there's a chart, I forget who published it, but the number of tasks that AI can handle today is growing by 2x every 7 months. That's an incredible exponential curve. I'm a human. I think linearly for the most part. Exponential is very hard for me to grok. But let's just say this, where I've seen applicable AI today inside a go-to-market motion, it can increase a couple of things. I see it not as a headcount reducer. I see it as changing the shape of capacity, right? So when we think about the different curves, like a ramp curve or your win rate, those shapes of those curves, those slopes could change. Now, are they going to change fundamentally? There's a different type of elasticity to them. So where AI can be helpful, throughput per rep, right? So think about your motion of a sales rep. You have leads, you're researching the leads. Well, that manual research could be offboarded and offloaded to an AI. You have back-to-back phone calls with clients. Pretty much every sales rep at 4 p.m., 5 p.m. after the day is done, they're trying to recall every single call they had during the day. And guess what? Which calls are going to take the brunt of memory recall loss? It's going to be the first calls, right? Which is very interesting because that's when your reps are at their most fresh, right? They're in the mornings, but then they have the worst notes for those ops. Decreasing time to ramp. Could you fill in your role play, your peer learning? Did you have an AI coach where a one-to-one coaching or a one-to-few can't fill in like one-to-one with AI, right? So there's opportunities to scale improvements in the org, particularly on the enablement side. Lead quality, there's a little bit of recapture. Enrichment tools are fairly good today, but you could also maybe even recapture some diamonds in the rough from your lead volume. Your 17% MQL over lead ratio, maybe that changes to 20%. Well, that 3% gain is 3 over 17, right? So that's not an immaterial gain on your top of funnel. Next is going to be, your pipeline creation, right? If your BDRs are slowing down to do research, like LinkedIn cursor research, well, why not just feed it a digest of the greatest hits, look at the value prop of the company, look at the motions and the use cases, and then marry it to your own company's value prop. Well, those are opportunities to give them teleprompter, Ron Burgundy type notes to go right into the call and hammer out a few calls, right? You go from 40 research calls to maybe 50 research calls. That's a 10 call uplift, right? On your SDRs who are more prepared for those calls. And I will say, Steve, good call on lead routing. There's a client I have right now. They have a contact us form, and they literally just capture your email and why are you reaching out. And then they used to have one person reading every single text box, but now I have an AI. You just have an LLM, with a clever prompt, trying to identify what the use of where you're going to route this lead. And then number one, AI is not a silver bullet, right? Folks are talking about 4x, 10x productivity. I think that works on the dev space, right? If you're a developer and you're already top decile in your craft, yeah, I can see you being 10x, right? But if you're thinking about, sales, for the most part, sales operators are trying to increase the average rep, right? We're not trying to improve the top 10% of reps. We're trying to move the average to the right, to skew more to the right. So AI is not a silver bullet, but I think it can, if you add all these little gains together, you can have some meaningful productivity improvement.
And again, this gets into the assumptions. All right, we're going to change the shape because we think we may get more throughput for a rep? What are we actually doing to do that? When will it be live? So thinking through all this type of stuff. So I think it's super helpful. All right. How are you actually operationalizing AI here, Jeff?
A couple of ways, right? So we want to take a look at the customer journey and identify the highest leverage KPIs, and then look at feasibility. Could AI be in its current form be feasible? Is it feasible to make a meaningful shift there, right? So a couple of projects that you might consider. MQL eligibility, Steven mentioned lead routing, right? So before you route, you have to score, assess the lead essentially, and then before you score and assess the lead, you have to enrich. AI is fantastic at those things, right? Because it can bring first-party data, it can bring third-party data, and then it can scrape the web, parse it at an incredible speed, and then do a bang-up job on that front portion of the top of the funnel. Next is outbound. Now, I played around with AI bots that can make phone calls. They sound fairly realistic. I think that would work well if you're calling into like a vertical local plumber, right? Or an automotive shop. I think you can use AI for that. But if you're getting to like 4 or 5 question, pre-qualification call, I think it's going to go sideways pretty quickly. But you can have AI assisted outbound with pre-call scripts. Like for example, I've been using Clay recently to create that first email reply. It researches the company, does like a whole SWOT analysis on it, and then it researches the persona, goes into your LinkedIn, looks at your background, and then it makes a judgment call on like what are the value props that this company could have to offer for them, and then craft a sub 100 character email. AI is fantastic at that. Now you can decide to have a human in the loop to send the email, review before you send, or you have it send out. If you feel risky, yeah, you can do it. Next is taking a look at your opportunities. So managers have variation in their capabilities to review pipelines, to look at every opportunities, and they're also constrained by bandwidth, right? So reviewing every call, looking at every single note, reading the next step in every opportunity before the forecast call. Not every manager does that, but you can make a manager a super manager by having AI do all of those things. Next, you can do the same thing with, you don't just have a sales pipeline, you have an existing customer pipeline. So you can apply the same craft of the trade all the way over to the post-sales side of the funnel. We talked about improving data hygiene and detecting inconsistencies. I think this is really interesting. You have reps who have naturally, some are sandbaggers, some have happy years. Where do you normalize, right? The best managers today, when it comes to forecasting, they know the behavior of their reps, and they can kind of right size the type of judgment that typically apply on the forecast.
And so, to Jeff's point, we see these all as use cases. Take a look at your go-to-market motion, figure out like what are the 1, 2, 3 most high impact use cases, and then based upon that, how do those kind of improvement efficiency gains impact your capacity planning process, right? All right, we're continuing to move on. Keep the questions firing away. Love it. All right, aligning the entire go-to-market team. The reason why we put this meme in here originally is one of the classic mistakes I've seen, Jeff, I'm sure you've seen this as well, is, and I was kind of alluding to this earlier with this prospect we were talking to yesterday, is like somebody essentially says like, oh, hey, we need to go hit $1 million next year. Well, we got $500,000 a quota on the street. We just need that, $5,000 a quota on the street. And they stop there at the sales team. And they don't do anything on the marketing, the BDR front, and equally as important on the downstream side on the CS front, right? They don't think about this as an entire alignment across the entire go-to-market motion. And to Jeff's point earlier, how is the product kind of layering into this between what's coming down the pipe next year, right? So thinking about this across the entire go-to-market team, I've seen lots of capacity planning processes where it's CEO, CFO, and head of sales / CRO, and marketing is not in the room, BDR is not in the room, CS is in the room. So getting all those team members in the room. Jeff, what are your 1 or 2 favorite do's and don'ts from aligning the entire go-to-market team?
So have a model, right? I like to use a 30-statement analogy. You want to have a living, breathing go-to-market model that is set in stone on day 1, but then you have it measured throughout the year, right? So you have your operating rhythms. Naturally, you have your board meeting, right? That's always going to be there, but you want to have touch points internally before you even have to present it to the board, right? So weekly business reviews, monthly business reviews, or quarterly business reviews, whatever is, amenable and makes sense for your organization. So driving alignment through having thoughtful operating rhythms would be my number one. Number two is when you're in your plan, you are factoring in ramp, attrition, and performance metrics, right? That's all baked into the model. And then third is you make sure that as an org, you don't set the plan, set it and forget it, right? You go back and you test your assumptions. And then if you're falling short in a core area, a core assumption, then, be bold and have a conversation. Okay, do we need to pull the and in cord, right? We'll use Kaizen, little TPS, Toyota production system, stop the lines and reassess. Let's triage. What's going on here? Like, why are we not performing with this specific core assumption?
And to Jeff's point, one of our kind of recommendations, and we're going to talk about this kind of like going forward kind of tracking process, you should be taking a look at the assumptions and updating those assumptions. We normally recommend on a quarterly basis. It's a little bit kind of depending on what is the assumption and, how long your sales cycle is. So you kind of like have more accurate data. But like, for example, if you said, hey, we have a 25% closed win rate, and then you get to the end of Q1 and all of a sudden you were tracking 22%, well, you should probably think about kind of lowering that. That then has the kind of inverse effect on requiring you to have more pipeline. If it's requiring you to have more pipeline, does the marketing team have enough budget? Are you doing enough outbound? So then having those conversations is this ongoing conversation. It's not just a once a year conversation. All right. So Jeff was kind of teeing this up. I can unequivocally say, without a doubt, one of the most successful things we do here at Domestique, something we call demand council. But at the end of the day, what demand council is, it's an accountability alignment process, which allows you to kind of constantly look at the targets coming out of your capacity planning process to say, are we on track or are we off track? If we're off track, what are we off track? Is it a demand, a conversion, an ASP issue? Where are we off track? Oh, it's enterprise and marketing generated pipeline in enterprise. And then what are we doing about it? This is unequivocally the number one thing that will allow you to hit next year's number, because it's this real-time tracking process. A lot of people have kind of different versions of this. I've heard pipeline counts, I've heard different versions, but like this is what we do. And essentially what this is, and Jeff, I know you have a version of this, is you take all of the kind of goals coming out of your capacity plan. So all of these things, and it's not just the bookings goal, but you break it down into, all right, what's our SAL goal? What's our SQL goal? And by different segments, okay, this is for enterprise, this is for market, as well as pipeline generation sources. All right, this is inbound generate, so on and so forth. And this is a weekly meeting with the heads of sales, marketing, BDR, CS to essentially look at these targets. And as I mentioned, are we on track or are we off track? Why are we off track? ASP, demand, conversion. Where are we off track? And then what are we doing about it? And then in each subsequent meeting, you review the action items of like what you're doing about this. We've had lots of examples. One of the classic examples we like to talk about is we're working with an organization and they're having this big thing in kind of their SMB thing. And I realized that a couple of things were happening. One, there was a screw up in the system, so leads weren't getting routed correctly. So literally these, tier 1 leads were not getting routed and they were just going to die. The second thing we realized is even the leads that were getting routed correctly, they didn't have enough capacity. But we were able to identify it. We got the routing fixed, and then we added additional capacity for them. Then all of a sudden we saw a massive uptick. So like those are the types of things as you're thinking about. The classic mistake here is you all align on it, you put it in a drawer and you never look at it again. Jeff, I know you've done a lot of this. What's the process you use for the ongoing accountability, particularly as you think about heading into FY26?
Yeah, I call these VPs of RevOps the unofficial like chief accountability officer or chief alignment officer, right? The skill of herding cats is paramount with any good head of RevOps. But a demand council is really again, it's an operating cadence, right? It's temperature checking and QAing, your top of funnel as much as possible, right? A lot of folks tend to already have pretty strong like sales forecasting muscles, right? You have a deal review every week, big deal review. You're reviewing it between reps and managers. But I think, we don't do it enough at the top of funnel, right? when SDRs report to marketing, marketing doesn't typically run a pipeline review historically. If they're baked into sales, they might do it. So, but you want to have a dedicated interlocking function, right? Demand gen, marketing, sales development. And you want to have a couple of things. You want to look at the data, and then you want to address gaps. And then you want to also address like training as well as upcoming campaigns. That is going to create alignment across your top of funnel.
Could not agree with you more. So this will be included in kind of the deck that we'll send out, but this is just kind of some basic steps and kind of how to operationalize it. Long story short, whether you're using a demand council model or not, having some sort of like ongoing, as Jeff described it well, operating cadence process where you're constantly re-evaluating the targets coming out of your capacity plan to essentially say you're on track, you're off track. What that allows is that allows you to avoid the second oh shit meeting. And I said we were going to talk about this. That's the worst one. You definitely don't want that one. And that's the one that happens typically in July, where all of a sudden you all get together and you realize, oh shit, we're not going to hit the number this year. And the reason is like, pipeline cycles and so on and so forth. And you haven't been paying attention to enough, and you haven't been doing the small tweaks in the year to kind of constantly reevaluate it. So constantly look at this. And then as we talked about earlier, on a quarterly basis, take a look at the assumptions to essentially say, do we need to tweak assumptions? Because the targets you may then drop into a demand council, a pipeline council may change based upon how you're doing throughout the year. All right. Here is an order of operations. We got here. I don't know if we're going to get here in time. We're not going to go through this, but we're going to use this as an opportunity. Open it up. I love the questions that have been coming in. What thoughts, comments, questions? As I mentioned, Jeff is one of the most talented RevOps operator we know. So like, this great opportunity to kind of pick his brain. What other questions do people have? By the way, I'm super comfortable sitting in silence, so like I can wait. I can sit here for another 6 minutes, unless you guys have questions.
This is really good. Jeff, longtime listener, to a consumer of some of your thought leadership. It's great to meet you personally live here. I don't think I would really adjust anything. I'd more so just reinforce. I think what's most important to me and impactful is like, we need to roadshow this in front of a bunch of CEOs because a lot of times they just don't want to take up the bottoms up capacity plan and see the disparity and the risks therein that sets you up for a replan mid-year.
I could not agree with you more, Trent. It's good to see you, sir. I think to the point you're making, after the issues that we run into are CEOs who are not willing to have the difficult conversation up front, and then you end up having the more difficult conversation of the reforecast, the replan, whatever it is mid-year. So. Cool. What other thoughts, comments, questions?
I'm curious if you're seeing with your clients in the advent of AI, are you seeing more of a like what's the mix of increased like growth expectation related to AI versus potentially an increase in expected like throughput from the go-to-market motion, if that makes sense. So like, are people more focused on, hey, we think we can grow faster with what we have, or are they thinking we can decrease our sales team or our go-to-market team by X amount and still generate the same, like roughly the same level of growth we've been experiencing? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of instances of both. But I'm just curious, like if you have a sense of if one is kind of outpacing the other, I guess.
Jeff, what are your thoughts?
So I'll just speak from the examples and the environments that I've had an opportunity to work in, and then some of the VPs of RevOps that I interview for my podcast and their thoughts. So some orgs have a mandate top down, right? The board is telling the CEO to have an AI strategy. And it's coming as an imprecise mandate down to the CRO, which is you need to go add AI in there, but it's not necessarily go get 20% more due to 100% increase in AI adoption. So there is more of a non-specific mandate with one client that I have. Another client is, hey, can we have a subset of our existing signups as the PLG motion business covered by a robo SDR, right? That we weren't previously. So this would be an accretive experiment. And so they're being very cautious around, let's just take a small subset, go prospect and stem on a robo basis and then escalate to a human, or dangle an app queues type coupon to have them close, right? So there's like an experiment, and it's more icing on the cake there. I haven't seen too many unrealistic firm growth numbers, but I've seen more fuzzy, we need to have AI and have it impact growth. Like you got to have some sort of AI roadmap. It seems very fuzzy at this point in time.
Yeah, Brian, outside of the private equity firm that I mentioned earlier, there's now talking about, rule of 60.
You have my best idea, Reese.
I happen to interact with that private equity group quite a bit. So
I have a feeling most of you probably wouldn't take that long for you to figure out who it was, but yeah, we're seeing similar types of things. That how do you start to kind of layer in AI to kind of get this? I think to Jeff's kind of walk through in the AI section of if all of you as operators can pick 2 or 3 or 4 use cases to get AI starting to layer in there, you'll see some of those productivity gains. Now, is it going to be 50%? Probably not, but we'll start to see that, and we're going to test this. And because things are advancing so quickly, a year from now, we'll have a much better understanding where things are at. So, all right, team. Really appreciate everybody taking the time out. I love the discussion. Jeff, thank you from the bottom of our heart. As we're truly grateful for the friendship and the partnership over a long period of time. If any of you all have questions, we'll obviously send out kind of the recording as well as this deck. I know people had asked questions about templates on life cycle stage advancement, capacity planning. There's examples in here, but if you got other questions, reach out, Alex, me. Jeff, where's a good email that they can find you at as well?
You can reach out to me at jeff@revopsimpact.us.
Cool. Thank you all very much. And by the way, just so you know, we're always happy to jump on a call and do a free working session. Just shoot the shit, kind of help you think through this. If you need help, kind of land and plan on this year's capacity plan or anything like that. But thank you all. Hope everybody has a very happy Thanksgiving for those of you who are in the States, and all that good end of the year. So thank you all.
Thanks.